Welcome back to the Relentless Growth Podcast with myself, Chase Calhoun, and my good friend, Jack Maher. How are you doing, Jack?
Doing great. Ready to dive into this one.
Nice. Today, we're going to be talking about, comparing rehab projects versus new construction. So for people that are either just getting started or thinking about getting started in real estate investing, or people that are along the path, like I guess maybe some of the pros and cons and just some of the differences between taking on rehab projects of different scales versus just straight up ground up new construction. But before we dive into that, did you want to share a win and a quick update?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. For those new listeners who may be tuning in, I'm Jack Maher. Company is Jack Maher Builders, and we're in Spring Hill, Tennessee, so about 30 minutes south of Nashville. And so we build new construction, single family and multifamily product. And so a big win from last week was on Friday. We've got a brand new apartment complex called the Emerson in Spring Hill, and we had our first tenant move in. And so that's always a good day, and never without a little bit of fun around it. I got a call on Thursday night at 6 p.m. That a sprinkler had burst on the third floor. So thankfully, the unit that was moving in was unaffected. But, that's just the name of the game. Those things tend to happen at the worst moment. So we were still able to get it moved in on Friday, and we're putting it back together. But
any collapsed ceilings or just a bunch of water?
Just a bunch of water. It flowed through pretty quick. Got to cut drywall, dry it out. Really not the end of the world. It happened quick enough, and we caught it quick enough. But not the call you want to get on a Thursday night when people are moving in the next day. So it is what it is. But it added a little bit of suspense to that last day. So that was a win, even with some bad things surrounding it. So we got people living there. So that's great. What about you?
Cool, man. That's awesome. I think one thing for us, we just started a new project manager on our team. So getting him started and up to speed, it's been a good thing. We probably waited a little bit longer than we should have to fill that position, and so looking forward to getting him up to speed so he can help. And I'm sure just about the time he gets rolling, we're going to overload him and be looking for somebody else. So I think that's a good win for us. And then just updates where we're still continuing to push really hard on the new construction build to rent space. So we've had several starts, I would say, in the last week or so, and we're looking at hiring an engineer to start a small build to rent development project, and still we've been trying to suck up infill lots whenever we can get a hold of them. So it seems like one or two a week that we've been closing on. So it's just as we're coming across good deals on infill lots, we're trying to suck them up while they're still reasonably priced. So I think that's it for me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's good progress.
Well, cool, man. Let's jump into it. So one thing we thought would be good is to kind of compare maybe a little bit the rehabs versus new construction. So I don't know, for people maybe that are just joining in, Jack, his pretty much, or maybe just total experience is all on the new construction side, both single family and multifamily. And then for me, I got started with rehab projects, burrs or flips style projects, both lighter rehab and all the way up through what I would consider extremely heavy rehab projects. So like properties that were destroyed or almost destroyed by tornadoes or fires and stuff. And then honestly, I've since shifted to new construction myself, although I'm still very tempted by the rehab sometimes, including one that I just came across last week that I'm contemplating pulling the trigger on. So maybe we can get into that a little bit later. Jack, do you have any experience with rehabs, or you've just been 100% new construction the whole time?
Yeah. So once we build something, we obviously keep a lot of the things we own. So the multifamily is a little newer, but we've got houses and things like that we've owned and rented out for 25 years. So even if you build new and keep it, you end up being in the rehab space at some point or another, And then we bought a project with a couple guys in Jackson, Tennessee a few years ago that we weren't hands-on every day in, but it was a rehab, and it was more workforce housing. And so got to see a little bit of that from afar, but definitely the bulk of my experience is on the new construction side.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. So like I said, for me, it's been, I started with rehab smaller projects. When I say smaller projects, smaller houses, right? And then over I guess my career in construction and real estate investing, that's kind of scaled up over time. So I have a lot of experience with rehabs. I think rehab projects are a great place to get started on that smaller scale. So if you're looking to just get started, there's still a lot of like value that can be added with a good purchase on a rehab project. And even at scale, like you talked about the apartment complexes, we haven't done any large scale apartment complexes, not because we wouldn't, just because I haven't come across a good deal on one that I guess made sense. But we've done some smaller apartment complexes over the past couple of years, and they've actually worked really well. I think the biggest thing with one of the biggest things considered on new construction versus rehabs is with the new constructions, the cost pretty much is what the cost is, right? It's like the land, maybe you can negotiate the cost of the lot or the land a little bit. But for the most part, like you have pretty fixed costs. And so once you understand what those fixed costs are, it's very predictable. With the rehabs, there's a lot more flexibility in there because it's really going to depend a lot on what you pay for the project. And so that can be a good thing or a bad thing. Like I've had it like really go in my favor, and I've had it kind of bite me because I, either paid, I got a good deal on it and I paid probably less than it was worth, or sometimes I paid more than it was worth, and it kind of bit me. So I'd say there's a lot on the front end as far as negotiating a price on the rehabs that's enticing to people just getting started, but you also have to be careful there.
I think that's a great point. And to me, it kind of flows into our previous episode on kind of the hidden cost of real estate. Because one of the things that's changed, even in the time that I've been doing it, which is just 6 or 7 years on the new construction side, is how long things take. And so not just from like a build perspective, which we've had material delays and things like that since COVID, but on an approval, on permitting, there are a lot of steps that you kind of jump and don't have to go through if you take on an existing product. And so I would agree with you on a lot of your costs are more predictable on the new construction side, but sometimes your timing isn't. And so I think that's an advantage of the rehab, is that you can still hit unknowns, but you very seldom are you going to hit, we've been waiting a year on a permit on a project, and due to local bureaucracy or whatever hoops we had to jump through. And so the swings on some of the new construction side can be pretty dramatic on how long it takes. And it's something that, 5-6 years ago would have taken us 2 months, might take us 6 to 8 months right now. And so that's a huge swing. And when like we talked about last episode, when you're talking about carried interest, when you're talking about, gaming out your exit, or whether it's getting it on the market or renting it or whatever it is, I think the timing side really favors rehab. And Chase and I were talking offline about the economy right now, and I don't think either of us really know what's going on or what's going to happen. But being in kind of an uncertain space, the new construction side is scary because, where we're developing a piece of land, once we buy a piece of land, before we bring $1 in, it's probably at least 2 years. And so the world could be dramatically different. During COVID, when we were building, man, it was dramatically better. We were selling houses for way more than we ever thought we could. But there have also been times where the opposite is true. You bring a project online, like we just had some single family lots that we decided to sell because it wasn't the ideal time to build. And so just that time horizon and being able to react quick on the rehab side, I think really favors it, especially kind of in the environment we're in right now. But I'd be interested to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the economy is weird right now, and so I think like you said, building and selling and even flips, kind of make me a little bit nervous right now. Even in the last couple of years, I would say any project that we've taken on, even if it's like we want to build and sell, or we think we want to renovate and sell, it's got to underwrite for me if I keep it as a rental. And so I think for us doing it through that lens, it's kept us a little bit more protected. I think with the rehabs, there's a little bit more They can be quicker, and so which saves on some of those hidden carrying costs, but it depends on the scope of the rehab. And so I think personally that where a lot of people do really well, like in flips or even burrs for rental properties, are in the lighter, what I would call lipstick rehab. So they find a property that's like maybe just slightly distressed or outdated, or a lot of times maybe it was an elderly person that owned the home for years and then passed away and passed it down to their kids, and their kids are just wanting to get rid of it type deal. Those can be great. I personally had really struggled with those because I like nice, new, clean, fresh properties. And so those like light ones don't work because you end up over improving them, and they don't work well. And so we always went towards those like heavy rehabs. So it was like I wanted the ones that were like falling down that I got super cheap, or they caught on fire, so I got them super cheap. And those ones actually can swing the other way, where it's like in the past where we've done these like tornado projects or like these heavy rehab fire properties, they take longer. What I found is those rehabs can take longer, and even the full gut remodels of like apartment complexes, because we've done that where we've like gone in, bought a small apartment complex, given everybody notices to vacate, where we actually vacate the whole building because the thing was like 30 years old and falling apart, and then renovate the entire thing. So completely gut remodel the whole apartment complex. I think sometimes those larger scale rehab projects can take longer than build new. Now, not the entitlement. So the entitlements and approvals and permitting and all that stuff, but the actual construction timeline. So again, I go back and forth with the rehabs can be great, but sometimes a little bit more clunky than a new construction, because it's like you think you're doing X until you start tearing everything out. And you find a slew of problems, or even continue to have problems that you didn't even get down to far enough after they're finished. So it's just an interesting comparing the two. One thing I will say on the rehabs is some of the biggest, like if you're looking from a pure profit, like either equity when complete, if you're keeping it, or from a sales standpoint, I think your profit margin can get higher on those rehab projects, especially the heavily distressed ones. Again, but a lot of that's on the buy side. So it's like if I can get a good enough deal on it, like I've bought houses or even small apartments before that were heavily damaged, and I bought them literally like because they were so heavily damaged, cheaper than what the lot would have cost me. So it's kind of a weird thing. And those are some of the deals that I've done the best on. So like a fourplex that caught on fire, I paid $10,000 for it when the lot itself was probably worth $100 because people just didn't want to deal with it. So that is the upside, is you can't find those deals usually on new construction.
No, I think you're exactly right. Yeah, that's a great point. And that's one of the, I think we should probably do an episode on land on another episode, because I think that would be interesting. But from a real estate perspective, that's where we've been successful, is buying and holding land. And that way, you kind of lock in your basis. And so you've got that low cost, even on new construction. But it's very difficult to achieve if you're paying retail for stuff. And we have, we just bought an entitled site for an apartment complex and paid retail for it. But yeah, you've got a certain basis locked in, and from there, it just kind of dictates everything you do with the property. So you've got to build a certain quality property based on what you paid for the land. And so then you've got to get a certain rent. And so it all kind of works up from there. So the buy truly is, it's the old saying, but that's where you make the money. You don't make the money when you sell it, you make the money when you buy it. And so it's true whether it's new construction or rehab. And I think obviously new construction has its advantages. We put the stuff behind the wall, so we theoretically know what's there. All the unknowns of a rehab are somewhat mitigated with new construction. And so it's nice to know. It's nice to know that, hey, if something does happen, we know where things are. We know what pipe is there. We know X, Y, and Z. And so it definitely makes it easier if you do have problems to go back and fix it. But it definitely, it has its challenges. You build new, and nothing is smooth, and so I don't want to oversell new construction. Like, hey, you don't have any problems. You get to decide everything and pick everything, and then you're good to go from there. I mean, you do have way more control on your base product, but you've got a little more exposure. It takes longer. And so I think it's an interesting discussion. I think starting out new construction is super daunting for people, and that's very valid. I think taking the path that you did, where starting with rehabs, understanding the process, getting a trustworthy group of subs around you, and then taking on new construction is probably the wisest thing, because some things in new construction are tough to get past. If you don't pour your footer right and you don't know what you're doing there, it doesn't matter if you build the nicest house in the world on top of it, and so getting some of that base knowledge down, I think, is a key. And I think what I would tend towards, if you've got somebody out there listening who's like, hey, I want to start right now, I would say a rehab or something like that, and I would tend towards your lighter rehabs. It's something you can get in, get out of, react quick, and not be sitting on carrying cost, and not be hoping that the market does something that we can't control. And so I don't think, we've all learned that lesson over the last couple of years, is we have no control over the market. The market's going to do what it's going to do. It went way up during COVID. It's gone way down the last 2 years, and we can't impact that. So we have to be prepared. We have to underwrite it for a rental or a sale or whatever it is. And so I think flexibility is really the name of the game. And I think with a rehab right now, you've got more flexibility than you do with a new construction product, probably.
I think one interesting thing that's worth being aware of, or at least noting this, is probably like area specific, maybe. But when you're comparing, and so I would agree, I think starting with the rehab is good, especially if it's mine. So like some of the best ones, and we used to do these for customers, like we'd help them buy an ugly property and we'd fix it up for them and we'd manage it for them. We've gotten away from that, right? But that was something I did for a long time for other people. And it's like some of the best ones that we would get is, it's like we want the property that's been sitting on the market forever, and like the instant, like it's a great neighborhood, the bones look solid, but it's like every room's a different color. So it's like yellow, purple, and blue and green and like all these funky colors. And I'm thinking of one specifically in my mind where it's like every room was this crazy bright color. And it's like they had a dog that literally chewed holes in the carpets in every room. But other than that, it was like a 20-year-old home, like newer construction home that was in great shape. And so it was like literally just paint and floors made a ginormous difference in the way it looked. It made it perfect. It would have been a perfect rental or a great flip, either one. So I think that's like a great one to start, because that's like small enough where it's not going to be overly complicated for somebody that's newer to go out and find somebody to paint and put in floors. I think we have to be really careful with the rehabs is when the scope starts creeping up much higher than that you have good contractors that you can really lean on. Because what I found is trying to manage the subcontractors for rehabs are like 10 times harder than with new construction, because you just have a lower quality subcontractor for the most part. Or if you try to get the high quality ones, they're going to be too cost prohibitive. So like my electrician right now wants to only do new construction. If I ask him to do a rehab for me, he's going to do it because he's doing so much work for us. But I know he's going to charge me more and he's not going to be happy about it. And if somebody just calls him out of the blue, he's either going to tell him no, or it's like he's going to bid it so high to make it worth his time that it gets cost prohibitive depending on the scope of those rehabs. And another really cool way to get started, and in a way, like I kind of did this in a roundabout way, but it's something that I see as a huge benefit for people right now. Like if somebody was interested in new construction, either build to sell at small scale or build to rent at small scale, trying to find somebody that's doing it and just hire them to build it for them. Like we're doing a little bit of that right now. For us, it's like we're doing our internal stuff, but we're doing some new construction for customers right now because it just makes sense for us. It just makes sense for us to do it. And because we've got it so dialed in, like we feel very confident with our costs and what we're doing with it. We're doing it for hard costs plus a flat fee. And so that allows somebody to step in and do a project. Now, they may not have as much. See, there's like two ways to look at it. Like we're gonna charge to do that construction for them, but there's still going to be a little bit of equity left in there for them because we're not just charging exactly what it's appraising for. And so it's a good way for somebody to get in and kind of like dabble in the new construction, but do it in a way that's very safe and still have a little bit of upside potential. Now, I don't know every market, but I would assume that in almost every market you could find like a trustworthy builder that would be willing to take something like that on. And especially like we don't want to do custom homes for people where people are we're super emotionally involved in them. Like, we're not saying we wouldn't do it, but it's really not something we're looking at pushing on. But if it's for another real estate investor and they want us to build them a rental property like the ones we're already building, it's really not that big of a deal. So we can do it at that cost plus a flat fee. And that's a great way for somebody to get started in new construction, because it's like, and some people are like, well, if I manage it myself, I might be able to save a little bit of money. And I would bet that like 99 times out of 100, even after they pay us the fee, like, we're still going to build it cheaper than what it would cost them to go out and try to figure it out themselves. And so even if it's just for a couple of them or whatever, for them to get their feet wet, no, we're not going to give them all of our subcontractors and all that kind of stuff. They would have to figure that out on their own if they wanted to do it. But I think that's a great way for people to get started if they can find a local builder who'd be willing to take on some projects and do it with the help of an expert to get started.
No, I think that's a great point. That's really going to be a key across the board. And one of the things you touched on there was kind of the market specific stuff. And I think that's one of the things that I would recommend to people starting out. I think look outside of primary markets. I think, as this is a way overgeneralization, and it's probably not true, but primary markets really haven't seen a price correction. You've seen prices drop a little bit. People come off, the high highs, but you really haven't seen a price correction. I know a lot of people are being successful in secondary and tertiary and even farther out markets where, you would just stay away from. You wouldn't even think to look there. And there are some guys I know who are being hyper successful, even building stuff like custom houses in, an hour and a half from Nashville. Places where I wouldn't necessarily think to look. So I think counterintuitively, smaller markets right now, I think there's more opportunity because it's less crowded. You've got less demand. All the problems that I talk about with bureaucracy, permitting, generally, the farther you get away from an MSA, that goes away. And so you mitigate a lot of those issues. Your trades, your subs are going to be a little bit cheaper, a little more affordable the farther you get away from some of these big cities. And there's just less competition for you. And so I think that's an opportunity I would look at, that we are looking at, is some of these smaller markets that, maybe they don't hit the, whatever the metrics are, 5% population growth, no major employer, all the things that a lot of people on podcasts talk about, that they've got their three things and they only buy in these things. And the only problem is that's what everybody's doing. And so you're competing with a ton of people who are hitting it by the metrics. And so I know a guy up in Indiana who his market, if you look at it from a statistic standpoint, makes absolutely no sense. Nobody would ever invest there. And I know very few people who are more successful than him. And so I think sometimes it's stepping outside of conventional wisdom and just looking at the opportunities away from where everybody else is.
I agree with that. That's literally what I did with my career path. I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, which was one of the most, densely populated places in the United States, and had wanted to get in real estate investing, but it just didn't make sense. It was so competitive. Like, if I was trying to buy a fixer upper house, I'm going to be competing with 30 different people, and a lot of them are paying all cash. And I was just getting started, and then moving to somewhere like Central Arkansas, which I would very much, Little Rock, Arkansas, consider a great market, but it's definitely a tertiary market. It's not a primary market. And there's just opportunities here. We talked about land, right? We just put a small piece of land under contract for a build to rent subdivision, but it's technically a fixer upper house. Like, it would almost be something that somebody would look at to flip. And it's an old, rundown, abandoned house on 6.6 acres, really close to a great part of town. And so it's like, we paid the price for a crappy house. We didn't pay the price for a potential development opportunity. And so it's just, we bought it at a fifth of the price of what, once it's fully entitled and ready to go, we're 4 or 5 times what we paid for it, likely just by doing that. And then also being in a smaller, and I would say like Little Rock, maybe not specifically. I think the city of Little Rock tries to pretend like they're a big city, and they want to make things complicated like a big city would, just because they think that's what they should do. But this is just outside of Little Rock in a different municipality where it seems like they're really pro development. And so we shouldn't have any issues there. So I'll be curious to see how it goes. But stuff like that, that's another great example of like that technically could be a flip or a burr. Like if for some reason we got shot down and we're buying the land cheap enough that we could probably remodel the house and rent it out for several years if we wanted to and just sit on the land. Like that would almost make sense. And so finding those little opportunities are probably a lot easier in the Little Rocks than they are in the Nashvilles where people are just chomping at the bit to get anything they get their hands on. So yeah, it's very interesting.
I think that's spot on. And I think you bring up a good point too of look for things, we've bought a lot of things off the MLS over the years. I think a lot of people will preach direct to consumer. And I think there's a lot of ways to have success there. But looking at the things that are listed for a different use, I think is another strength. Like the deal you just brought up, most people are buying that as a house on 6 acres. And if you're looking at it for a different thing, your math on that purchase price is totally different than everybody else you're competing with. And so just keeping an open mind, especially when you get, 6.6 acres in our market, nobody's ever going to think it's just a house. They're going to think, hey, what can I do with this? So I can probably fit 3 or 4 more in or something like that. And so, but when you get into these smaller markets, I think the tendency is going to be to focus on the past, if that makes sense, and what's always been there. And so I think there are probably a lot of opportunities where you can buy something that's being sold for a totally different use and be able to take advantage of that and make it better. And it'll be an improvement, and I think that's the thing to concentrate on in these tertiary markets is you're doing something new, but man, it's going to be a positive benefit. Right now you've got a rundown house on 6 acres. I don't know how many units you plan to put there, but they're going to be nice. They're going to be new. If you rent them, they're going to be managed by a good landlord. Like that's going to be a huge positive for that community. And so I think that's another side of it that I think Chase and I are both passionate about is having a positive impact on the communities that we build in. And just the reality is the smaller the community, the more impact you can have. Doesn't mean you don't want to play in a big ocean, but just with a few projects in a really small town, you can make a big impact. And so I think that's part of it too, is you can, not that we want to be a big deal, but you can help transform a community relatively easily in a small town. And so I think that's something to look at as well, kind of away from the real estate side, but it's something that's interesting.
Yeah, that's great. I mentioned it or kind of alluded to it before we get started, but it's funny. We've steered away from the rehab stuff. So we've been turning down a lot of rehab. If customers call us wanting us to rehab apartments or whatever, I just turned down one. I'm like, hey, I'm not interested in, thanks, but we'd love to help you, but it just doesn't make sense for us to step in and do that. And then even internally, like I haven't bought a rehab project all year. But we have a lake house about an hour and 20 minutes from here. And I've been eyeballing this house. That's just like, it's like that. The yard's always 8 feet high and you can tell it's just been sitting there for 5 or 10 years and nobody's used it, but it's like, primo spot. And I've been sending them direct mailers and stuff. And I think somebody just bought it last month. And they posted these no trespass signs with the phone number. And so I got in contact with the guy and I have a feeling he bought it to flip it and then realized he was in a little bit, maybe over his head. And so said he was very much open to selling it. And so it's like I still get tempted by them because I'm like, man, it would almost be like, it's a huge rehab. But to me, it makes a ton of sense because there's a lot next door. Like I could build a house, but I'm going to have a very tight profit margin on that new construction house. I could rehab that existing house that's in really rough shape right now, but in a primo location. And there's a pretty hearty profit margin to be made on that. So it's something to be said with those rehabs. I think the biggest thing for people, if they're, and maybe you can give your advice too, if they're just getting started out, and I tell this to everybody, there is literally probably a million ways to be successful in business and especially real estate investing. And I think at the end of the day, you just gotta pick one and go with it. And so if it's rehabs, I would just try to really pick or new construction. Like, hey, I want to start and try to do new construction, or hey, I want to start and try to do rehab. It's just pick one and then try to get started on it. I do agree with the rehabs, trying to find that 1970s shag carpet one where it's just like an ugly house, but in a desirable neighborhood and doesn't require a ton of work. I think that's a great place to get started. Or if you decide to go the new construction route, I think partnering with an existing builder, and kind of in a way paying for their experience is well worth it. A great way to get started in that. Any advice for, I guess, people getting started?
No, I think you're spot on. I think, and I think, yeah, I mean, you mentioned partnering with a builder. Partnering with somebody on a rehab is not a bad idea either. Or saying, hey, you target a guy in your area who is doing it successfully. Tell him you want to spend an hour a week with them or something. Most people in the real estate space, I think you'd be surprised at how open they are, to teaching young people. If you're genuinely interested in learning, I think just walking the site, seeing the thing, saying, hey, what are the pitfalls you hit when you started out? I think engaging with the people in your local community, whether it's a RIN meeting or, there's all sorts of real estate meetups. But I think getting involved is kind of the first step, because doing it alone, it would not be fun. And, bigger pockets, there are a lot more resources than there ever have been, but there's nothing like somebody local who's doing it in your market, who understands whether it's code, zoning, the pitfalls of the local community, all those things. And so having to learn all that stuff is going to take a long time. But, if you can meet somebody, I think taking that shortcut is well worth it. So, yeah, I think partnering with people and just getting to know your local real estate community is the first step I would take.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. The one thing I would add to the getting advice or mentorship from people is like try to figure out a way. If you're going to go that route, I think it's an awesome way to just like cheat and skip a bunch of the mistakes and stuff. But try to figure out a way to provide value. Like we've had people approach us before, and we're like, and want that, and we're like, yeah, we'd love to help you, and here's something you can help us with. And then if they don't do it, it's like it's hard for us to want to like, it's that we could help them a bunch, but if they're like, yeah, I want to do this thing to help you guys, and then they never do it, it makes it so it's like, it makes it tough to want to help them. So if you can figure out a way to provide value to that person, even if it's just something really small, that's a good way to really build that relationship and or work for somebody that's doing it. If you're young and just getting started out, and you have the ability to just go work for them, like I would say that would be an amazing place to get started. I was on a call recently, and the question came up, like, what if you lost everything and had to start over again? That's one thing that even I think about, is like, I'm going to figure out what it is I want to do next. And like, I'm going to just go try to work for somebody, even if that's starting at a very low point in their company or whatever. But if you can get your foot in with somebody that's doing what you want to be doing and work for them, that's a great way to build that skill really quick.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Cool, man. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up for the day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please don't forget to subscribe, and share the podcast. If you got anything out of this podcast, or if you have any questions for us, please leave us a comment. I'll try to get back to you. And or if you have any, recommendations for future podcasts that you'd like to hear, don't hesitate to drop some recommendations. Have a great day, everyone.
See you, everybody.